a little tutorial guiding through all the available demos and basically just showing how someone would make use of them if you're coming into pbi-tools for the first time. That's the pbi-tools website. Super easy to remember because, as you can see, URL is pbi.tools. And this one has a GitHub link in the top navigation bar. If you click on that, you actually get to the pbi organization in GitHub. And that's basically where pbi-tools itself is hosted, as in the actual source code. But plenty of demos are hosted here as well. And that's actually what I wanted to talk about. A few weeks ago, I took advantage of a new GitHub feature, which is a organizational README file. So that's actually what you see when you get to the org landing page, and that allows you to actually put some formatted and complex content here now. So I'm using that, as you can see, as a inventory or table of contents for some of the demo repositories that are hosted in the same org. And that's pretty what I wanted to guide you through in terms of what's here, what does it all mean, and which ones would I recommend to look at if you want to get started. So at this point, conveniently, they all fit on one screen for me, and they're basically sorted by date. So you can see there's a date column here, where I'm basically telling you when that particular demo was created. That's usually also an indication of, well, obviously how recent it is, but also what features are covered in here. With respect to specific features, they're actually also listed here. So for instance, this one, as an example, it shows a dataset deployment, dataset refresh, but also deploying an embedded report, right? And so here, the SQL scripts feature that was introduced in preview 4 is demoed, and then here it's a demo of incremental refresh features, which came in preview 5. So this is pretty much some annotation. Over here, that's a brand new column, which I just added over the last hour. It shows, from a deployment point of view, what type of deployment is actually used or shown in those demos. So dataset basically uses the XMLA endpoint, which means it's Power BI Premium limited. And where it says report, it may be a little misleading. So report means it's effectively using a PBIX upload. The demos generally use what we call a thin report here. So where we literally have just a report definition in terms of pages and visuals, and where we're linking to an already existing data set. But you could actually use the exact same mechanism to upload what we call a thick report, a PBIX file that contains both a data model and the visuals. Where I've put brackets around this, it is a demo that happens to contain certain artifacts, but doesn't actually have a deployment script set up. So here, that's a perfect example. This is basically a repository for the Contoso sales model dataset, just to have it available here, because we're using that in other places. But it doesn't actually show any deployment. Right. So if you wanted to get started looking at report deployments, let's start with that. So you can see there are quite a few examples showing at the bottom here, basically a lot of them from March, which is actually when I did a lot of user group presentations earlier this year. This one goes back all the way to November. So that was basically one of the very first public demos. So all these early demos focus on reports. For the purpose of this, I would basically stick to that one here from the 24th of March. It's called Report DevOps Demo. And this particular link basically gets you straight into the repository. We can see by virtue of actually having a pbix proj.json file in the root of that repo, so that's a standard pbi-tools file, that we actually have a deployment manifest in here, right? So this is a JSON file where the deployments property defines deployment manifests. In this particular case, deployments for a report. So if I wanted to pull this, take this down to my local machine and then actually run the deployment myself, let's see what I have to go through here. So I'm already in a repo. Over here, I can go to the clone code drop down, and there are various ways of cloning things from GitHub. For instance, you can actually use GitHub Desktop. I'm a command line guy. I'm just gonna actually copy the URL here, and then I'm gonna go to my local machine. I set up a new folder, and I'm just gonna say git clone, and I'm gonna paste this URL. My machine is a bit lagging today. So here we go. So this is now cloning that repo to my machine. By convention, it creates a subfolder named the same as the repo itself. So it basically creates a subfolder called report-devops-demo now. And here we go. Now we're good. If I run the dir command, we can see we've got that folder now. If I cd into it and then run code dot, it actually launches Visual Studio Code in that particular folder. Now, I already mentioned, yes, I trust myself. I already mentioned that most of these demos actually contain thin easily because they have a connections.json file in here. So basically, looking at this repo, there are two subfolders, report and report2. Each of them effectively contain the contents of a pbix file. And so we can see by virtue of having connections.json here that this actually is a thin report with a already existing data set. Now this could be a stumbling block for you, which is why I'm pointing it out here. If you actually did what I just did, clone this and then try to deploy it straight away, you would have an issue because this one links to a data set with this particular GUID, A431, and so on and so forth, which only happens to exist in my very own pbi-tools tenant. That won't exist anywhere else, nor will you have access to it, right? So this is actually one area where you to intervene and ensure that there is a data set you can connect to. So let me show you what to do about that, because this could definitely be a stumbling block for some new people. So if I click here, this same inventory of demo repositories happens to have a dataset column, which basically shows what is the underlying data set for every single one of those. And we can see particularly those pbix thin report demos here, they all basically link to the same data set, which happens to be one from SQL BI. So introducing calculation groups is a freely available download on sqlbi.com. In fact, it's actually a resource which is linked to this particular article, talking about calculation groups. And if you scroll to the bottom of it, you can just click download and you actually get a zip file containing a pbx file. So what I can do now is I've got a brand new workspace. There's nothing in it, as you can see. And I can actually upload that file for pbi in order to have a data set to connect to. So if I just click local file, conveniently, that's already here because I tested that earlier. So this is the file I downloaded. Just click open. It's a very small file. There's not a lot of data in it. So we'll get there in a few seconds. There we go. I didn't even have enough time to have a sip of water. And conveniently, it also comes with an embedded report, which actually demonstrates that there's some data behind it. So now we've got a data set which all our other demos can be connected to. And there are two ways of doing that. So one is sort of the hard way, well, maybe the intuitive way would be you compile a pbx file out of the pbi-tools demo repo. Then you open it in Power BI Desktop and you explicitly point it to that new data set, right? So I'm not going to do that now because there's a lot of clicking and opening and waiting. There's a much more convenient way of doing that, and this is where the beauty of pbi-tools comes in. All you need to do is to identify the GUID for this particular data set, and you can do so quite easily just by clicking on it within the workspace. And then if you look at your URL and find the GUID that's listed right after the datasets part of the URL, that's the one you want. So I'm copying that now. The connect file we saw earlier, and as you can see in here, there are actually two places where a GUID is referenced, and it's very simple. You just go in and basically replace both of them with the GUID you've just grabbed. There we go. Copy paste, and then the other thing you need to do, where it says Power BI Service Model ID and it has a random number, you just put a 0 in there and you save, and that's basically pointed or repointed your thin report to a different data set. So now I can go ahead with pbi-tools deployment for this particular report, and it should all work, assuming I'm doing a couple more things. One is I need to specify where to deploy it to, right? And I need to specify the correct credentials. Again, the file you've downloaded from my demo will have settings that work for me, and for the pbi-tools tenant, they will not work for you, at least not out of the box. So one is, as I mentioned, we've got authentication settings. pbi-tools always requires a service principal because that really is best practice for automation. So we need to make sure that the tenant ID, client ID, and client secret work. And we also need to make sure that down here, where we've got our target environments, we actually reference workspaces that actually exist and that that particular principal has access to. So easy to do. Let me just find some stuff here. So I created a brand new principal earlier as well, and which means I actually have the client ID. Because I am deploying into the pbi-tools tenant, technically I don't have to change this. But I also wanted to point out you can specify your tenant ID in one of two ways. You can either put the URL in, right, as I have done, or you can put your GUID. So basically, if you go to the About Power BI, your tenant ID will actually show up down here. So you can copy that and then paste it in here. Okay. All right. So just coming back to client secret, theoretically, you could paste the secret in here. What I generally do and what is definitely recommended is to put that one into an environment variable and only reference the environment variable name as we've got here. And then the only other thing to do is to reference our workspace. So the one I created earlier is tool talk 9. And I can just go in here, tool talk 9. And I'm just going to change development for the time being. And the only other thing is right now I've got a wildcard here, right? Which basically means if I run a deployment, it will not just deploy report, it will also deploy report 2. So I have to make sure that the changes to the connection file are actually applied here as well. Let's see if that works. It's a live demo, so we shall see. So I'm opening a terminal. I've already downloaded pbi-tools and it's on my path, which means I can just type pbi-tools like this and it runs. And there we go. And so in order to trigger this deployment, I say pbi-tools deploy. I then reference the local folder by putting a dot here, and I then reference the name of my deployment manifest, which is basically this name. So it's the property nested inside the deployments object. So that is reports. If I then don't specify an environment, it will use the development environment by default. And the one thing I definitely want to do before would be to do a what if. What if basically tests my setting, particularly it tests my credentials, making sure I haven't misconfigured anything. And it otherwise won't do anything. So what if is a safe test mode. So let's run this, and it may or may not give me some errors now. Let's see what we got here. Let me make this a little bigger. First of all, it tells me where it's located, the deployment manifest. It then tells me that it's using the reports profile with the development environment. So let me just here, that's reports, that's development. It then also specifies the source. In this particular case, it's looking for PBIX proj folders with a wildcard. And it's confirming that there were actually 2 folders which match our wildcard. And then the most important thing happens. So this is definitely something we want to ensure. It aims to acquire an access token using the credentials. So this is very useful, making sure that you haven't misconfigured your credentials. As you can see, this one worked. Sorry. And then we're basically getting some debug output for every one of the 2 identified sources. Now that that's all worked, I'm just going to clear my terminal, and I can rerun this without the what if. And now it should run through the deployment for those 3 reports end to end, which basically means it's grabbing the sources, it recompiles those into a PBIX file, it then uploads those PBIX files to my workspace. So now we have 2 more reports. If I open that, we're going to see, there we go. We've got 5 pages. Clearly, it has data behind it. So the sort of repointing the dataset connection actually worked. Just to recap, 1, we needed to make sure that the dataset existed. So I did that by just downloading it from SQL BI and uploading it. 2, change the dataset connection using the connections.json file. 3, ensure I've got principal credentials here, and then 4, ensure I've got a workspace reference that exists in my tenant and that this principal also has access to. So that's something I didn't point out explicitly, but if we go back to the workspace and go to access, we can see this one here, tool talk demo principal. With an app ID of B372. That's been set up in here as a member. And if I go back here, we can see B372. That's actually the same client ID. And so, yes, with all those changes, we are good to go, and you can then basically evolve either the deployment manifest or the report definitions yourself.